Greetings. In viewing the state of the political landscape from a big picture perspective, from the perspective of futurism, it becomes apparent that the United States, and by extension other Western countries, especially other English-speaking Western countries that orbit the United States, metaphorically speaking, have taken up a very bizarre ideology, and that ideology is one that mandates fighting against nature, and how the greater the departure from nature, the more prestigious a certain belief is. Now, this ideology is doomed to failure because no matter how much money the United States has or how much it can spend in excess of taxes collected on account of being the reserve currency of the world, fighting against nature is an unwinnable battle. So what do I mean by fighting against nature, and why is that even considered prestigious? Now, we can't get too specific because we don't want to get in trouble, which is itself part of the problem. But think about the United States political landscape today. The more of a departure a certain group of people or a certain belief is, the greater the priority for normalization of that belief by the government and by international power networks. And we have seen the escalation of this in that something that was already a substantial departure from the natural order of things got superseded by something that was even a greater departure, and then that got superseded by something that is even more of an obvious affront to nature, to such an extent that schools and universities teach young people things that are obviously not true, and that people a century or 2 centuries ago would recognize as not true, despite how much ignorance existed in those past times in other areas. I've always said that one of the best types of education a young person could ever have would be to work on a farm, a small, modest farm, for a summer, just doing the chores and tending to the animals and things like that, because the amount they will learn about the real world, about the natural order of things, and how a small business even runs, is incredibly valuable relative to what they might learn in a classroom, which itself is now a vehicle of indoctrination. And this desire to supplant nature with increasingly extreme violations of nature originates from a desire to do justice that has gone too far. Think of it this way. At one point, many people were handicapped. They were either born without a limb or they were born blind or something like that. This was on account of malnutrition, other birth defect causing situations, and accidents as well. Things like this were common. Missing a limb, being blind, being deaf, whatever. As society became more prosperous, not only did incidences of this become less because there was less poverty among young families having children and things like that, infant mortality fell tremendously, and these problems became less and less. But for those who still had a disadvantage, it makes sense that the surplus resources of society could go towards mitigating this problem. So you have things like handicapped parking spaces and ramps for people who are in wheelchairs and so forth. A lot of poorer countries don't have these things. If you go to poorer countries in the world, there are no handicapped parking spaces, there are no ramps for easy access. All that's good, but as with anything that the government tries to do, it goes well past the optimal balance and to the other side. So the pendulum never rests in the middle. Once certain groups are designated as having been disadvantaged in the past, the attempt to fight nature on all possible fronts becomes more and more normalized. This becomes a top-down directive from the government. This gets propagated through institutions of higher learning because the professors at the topmost universities are considered authorities on any subject, and the vast majority of ordinary people will be told that if some professor at the topmost institution believes such a thing, therefore it must be true. And then an increasingly wide range of boutique groups and lifestyles get seen as not only normalized, but celebrity status, and this goes into the direction of even things that a healthy society would consider perverted or even criminal being normalized in a postmodern society. And since a lot of money flows towards, which originated from a legitimate desire to mitigate the unfairness of nature, goes too far, and therefore there is a financial incentive into overpropagation of certain ideologies. Because victimhood becomes chic, it becomes prestigious, and it becomes lucrative. And don't think for 1 minute that the right wing in the United States, to the extent it could even be called that anymore, is somehow a mitigating factor. Conservatism and the Republican Party in the United States is so weak as to not really exist at all. They in fact normalize the leftism of a short while prior in the process of pretending to fight the current leftism, which they're going to normalize in the very near future anyway. I've often said that conservatism is merely a short position on the accelerating rate of change, and that is why it is virtually a non-entity as an ideology and not worth paying attention to at all. So we live in a strange time where fighting nature has become prestigious in and of itself. Whether it's related to the climate, whether it's related to people's psychological or sexual psychological orientations, whether it's related to economic beliefs, all of the above. Fighting against nature has become the only ideology of the US government. Now, the private sector and regular people would not subscribe to this ideology, but the government, being powerful, can force them to pretend to comply, and that is what is happening here now. It is something that the future will look upon very poorly, because fighting against nature seems like the least intelligent path for any society to take. How can you fight against nature? Eventually, no matter how much money you have, you will lose out and nature will win. And that process can cause an overcorrection in the other direction as well, as has happened many other times in history. But alas, we are in a stage of society where fighting against nature has become the primary role of government, as well as forcing other people to pretend that they believe fighting nature is in fact normal for its own sake, in and of itself. No real explanation needed, just that the less you believe in nature, the higher social status your belief system should have. And that is why I have to be vague about this rather than give specific examples, due to the risk of appearing non-compliant with this mandate to fight against nature. Some food for thought, and if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Thank you very much for watching.